Okay, let's open in word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for the day. We also pray that you will give us strength to stand in a pretty difficult, evil day. Pray that you'll help us to keep rooted in the promises in your word, but also give us wisdom to understand what is going on and fill us with your spirit so that we might know the best way to act, always acting to glorify you in everything that we do. Pray you'll bless our time together today. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I've titled this Peak Lunacy. I also toyed around with calling it inverted reality. I'll explain a little bit, sort of, I think, the biblical basis where we are. And I'm going to tell you up front, my slides, I tried to put them in order, but they're going to jump around. So that if you're ADD today, you're going to love this update because it'll be switching screens and themes and things back and forth. I also taught first hour from Luke chapter 11, verses 5 through 36, if you want to look that up on our YouTube channel. Let's hear some other alternatives that we're at. And again, been talking for years about the convergence of events. And I think I'm going to try to bring into context a little bit of what's going on, because I think it is maybe much more prophetically significant than some people are giving it. Because I think in the big picture of things, there's a couple things going on that I think are very important. And then there's a whole bunch of little rabbit trails that fit into this. And it is a disrupted world. This is foreign policy from a while ago. I got notice this morning of an old article on foreign affairs from about a year and a half ago. Now that's published by a globalist organization. It's part of the Council on Foreign Relations. And the article was very interesting. It was published in the September-October 2020 issue, and it was called Giving Up on God. That's kind of an interesting thing from a globalist, largely globalist. They have people that aren't globalists that belong to Council on Foreign Relations, but by and large, it's a globalist, New World Order type organization. The global decline of religion. Listen to what this says, because I think it's interesting. Now, this is totally secular publication. In the early years of the 21st century, religion seemed to be on the rise. The collapse of both communism and the Soviet Union had left an ideological vacuum that was being filled by Orthodox Christianity in Russia and other post-Soviet states. The election in the United States of President George W. Bush, an evangelical Christian who made no secret of his piety, suggested that evangelical Christianity was rising as a political force in the country. And the 9/11 attacks directed international attention to the power of political Islam in the Muslim world. But, he says, since 2007, things have changed with surprising speed. From about 2007 to 2019, the overwhelming majority of the countries we studied, 43 out of 49, became less religious. The decline in belief was not confined to high-income countries and appeared across most of the world. Growing numbers of people no longer find religion a necessary source of support and meaning in their lives. So I will agree with the author of that article that there has been a decline in religion particularly since 2007. I would say that he overstates his case when he says a decline in religion. I think he means a decline in traditional religion that's God-centered. It has been replaced with a religion of humanism, secularism, and leftism, sort of this crazy mix that we see, because it's based on a belief. I mean, it's clear that a lot of things that this new religion, this what I would call the New World religion, believes things that they aren't based in science. You don't have men, and in a scientific world, you don't have men lifting weights and female weightlifting competitions at the Olympics. And everybody's celebrating it. A lot of people celebrating it. Now, what I've just said is heresy in the New World religion. But I'm not the one who's against science. So as we get closer to this time, I think this is to be expected. In fact, in 1 Timothy chapter 4, now the Spirit, verse 1, now the Spirit speaks expressly that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron. Listen, people are going to give themselves up. And this is talking about the church, but church in culture in general, to things taught by demons. These are going to be hypocritical liars. They're going to wear a mask of holiness, but are full of falsehood. Now, listen, can you think of any examples this week in the world that would satisfy that? And then they are unscrupulous since their consciences have been cauterized, rendered ineffective. You saw stunning displays this week of people who have no shame. It's stunning. As one commentator said, the people that believe this, they're past feeling that lying is wrong. In fact, they have jobs, good paying jobs, publicly funded jobs where they lie with the ease with which you breathe. And this is true everywhere we look. I've heard this quote a number of times this week. It comes from Lenin, hardly a guy that is quote-worthy, but I think he, even evil, murderous thugs can get it right occasionally. There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. And I might say there are days when decades happen. We saw a lot of significant things this week. Don't even have a slide for it. This week at Harvard has, now this may surprise you, the kings of diversity there at Harvard, they have 40 chaplains for different religious communities. This week, they selected or appointed or whatever a chief chaplain. So the chief chaplain at Harvard now is an atheist. And he wrote a book, something about how atheists can do good or something like that. Now, that's not the first time it's happened. I remember I talked about this years ago, that Tony Campolo, who was big in the postmodern mysticism wing of the evangelical church, evangelical in scare quotes, his son, Bart Campolo, became an atheist. He was appointed as the chaplain at the University of Southern California. So this is not something new, but this is, supposedly one of our leading educational institutions now has a chaplain who is an atheist. Now, sometimes I think that what's going on in the church, in culture, relative to how the church and culture views its relationship to the God of this world, the God of the universe, that's identified clearly in Scripture, that it sometimes has consequences in the physical world. So the declining belief in God, and particularly in the Christian God and Jesus Christ, will have other consequences. And I think this is pretty well documented. And so here, I mean, these are pictures that are coming out all the time. The West is in a severe drought. I know around here, it's kind of hard to grasp that in central Ohio because I've never seen corn and soybeans look like this, you know. I mean, the soybeans are huge, and the corn stalks look like little trees. But out west, it's bad. The Colorado River is drying up. It's bad. They didn't have the snowpack this year in California, most of the western mountains. So there wasn't a runoff this year. And when they did have precipitation last year, it fell in the wrong places and it ran off the places where it's not being collected historically. So the Hoover Dam, which has the largest man-made lake in America, Lake Mead, is down quite a bit. The pictures are stunning. Now, it looks like this picture in the lower left-hand corner, well, that's somebody messed up with their camera. They got the shadowing wrong. But no, that's what it looks like. There's this giant bathtub ring around Lake Mead now. It's at the lowest level that it's been since they finished filling it back in whenever that was, the 40s or 50s, 30s, 40s, or 50s. And here's already slide number 1 that's out of place. So I'm going to try to remember to come. Well, I'll talk about it now. This is from the Financial Times. French cafe owner fumes over health rules. This is happening all over the place. I know that there are some protests being lodged against government requirements that only certain people be allowed to enter their restaurants, health clubs, churches, etc. And a lot of restaurant owners I think there's a big lawsuit's been filed in one of the U.S. states to challenge these rules, saying, listen, we own a restaurant. We're not the police. If you want to enforce it, send somebody out here to enforce it, but we barely have enough workers to keep the food on the table as it is. And it becomes a difficult problem. I'm more convinced that what I see going on comes from what one radio program I listen to occasionally calls the Party of Davos. The World Economic Forum seems to be pushing that. And at the end of this, as I get towards the end, we'll try to unpack a little bit about who's in charge, who's doing this. I watched Tucker Carlson the other night, and he's like, who's making all the decisions? This doesn't make any sense. It can't be the guy that they trot out there every so often for a news conference at the White House, well, not a news conference, for a statement that came out to speak about Afghanistan. I've waited all day long to hear what he had to say. And what did he do? He was out there for 8 minutes, and the first 5.5 minutes were a political speech about how they're spinning us into oblivion in the Congress of the United States. And they're talking about a $3.5 trillion bill, which is really $6 trillion. Everybody seems to be. Have you noticed a bit of tension when you're out and about these days? Everybody's upset with everybody else. It happens in government. Here's the front page of Thursday's Toronto Star. Listen to this. These are quotes from people, but they could pick this up from a lot of people. If a unjabbed person catches it from someone who is jabbed, boo-hoo, too bad. I have no empathy left for the willfully unjabbed. Let them die. I honestly don't care if they die from Charlie Vector 019er. Not even a little bit. Unjabbed patients do not deserve ICU beds. This is mainstream Canadian publication. Simmering divide. No jab could mean no job for Air Canada employees. And then a whole article inside, as fourth wave grows, empathy runs low. And yesterday's Toronto Star, province to bring in vaccine passport. I'm only reporting to you the facts as what they are. You can draw your own conclusions. I've seen video after video from Australia. I could play you minutes, half hour of what's going on in Australia with regard to the latest lockdowns. And the goal of Australia has been 0 cases of that Charlie Vector 019er. Same thing in New Zealand. Folks, that's not possible. I mean, you have to think you're God as a leader of a country to think that you're going to accomplish that. Has there ever been anything that people have had that's a contagious disease that has led to this? I mean, ever. Everywhere, ever, all over. And then the censorship and everything that goes with it. So listen, I'm going to probably talk more about this at some point in the future, but it will only be on Rumble or Telegram or Gab. I'm setting up different accounts, but it's hard to manage all the different accounts. There's a new one called Getter, Gettr. By the way, there's also a platform that a lot of people are using that have been banned from Twitter called Substack. You might check it out. There's some good people there. And like every place else, it's not an endorsement of any particular person, but there's some good writers and thinkers at that place. And Twitter tried to buy it this week. And the owners of Substack said, get lost. But here is, I don't know who this guy is. I think he's a health czar in one of the states or provinces of Australia. And I think this kind of sums up this is an example of what's going on.
Removal of masks.
There we go.
There will be no removal of masks to consume alcohol outdoors. So you will no longer be able to remove your mask to drink a cocktail at a pop-up beer garden on a footpath as part of a pub crawl.
Is that clear? It's crazy. It also leads to some kind of inconsistent things in our politics and culture. Here's a tweet from, I believe he's the health director of New York City. New York City's new screening program for indoor dining requires that you show proof of that thing and ID. If you have an ID, don't forget to bring it. If you need an ID, get the city's ID NYC, available to all, including undocumented. And now who's got a bill in Congress? Who's running around saying, you're requiring an ID to vote? How cruel, how unfair, how can you do that? And the same people who would support that say that out of one side of their mouth are saying this out of the other. And here's the website, ID NYC, how to apply. But it's racist to insist on an ID to vote. And there you see it, the New York City identification card. Fill out the application online. We'll even help you do it if you have problems. But you can't require it for somebody to vote. That's just not fair. That makes us difficult, I guess. You know what's going on. You know the drill. Here is a story from Chicago. Just listen to this.
Kind case. A Cook County judge here at the Daly Center has stripped a Chicago mom of her parenting rights because she's refused to get the COVID vaccine.
And he is a very sweet boy. He's my whole world.
You miss him?
I miss him more than anything.
Rebecca Ferlitt has been divorced for 7 years and shares custody of her 11-year-old son with her ex-husband. What had been a 50-50 split in parenting time. But on August 10th, in an unrelated child support hearing, Cook County Judge James Shapiro asked Ferlitt whether she'd been vaccinated. When she told the judge no because she's had bad reactions to vaccines in the past, Judge Shapiro stripped Ferlitt of all of her parenting time until she agrees to get vaccinated.
I think that it's wrong. I think that it's dividing families, and I think that it's not in my son's best interest to be away from his mother.
Ferlitt is now asking the appellate court to stay the judge's order, her attorney saying the judge has overstepped his authority.
You have to understand, the father did not even bring this issue before the court. So it's the judge on his own making this decision that you can't see your child until you're vaccinated.
We just wanted the mother to pay support.
The father's attorney, Jeffrey Leving, says while they were surprised by the order, he believes the judge is making the right call, given the seriousness of the pandemic.
And there are children that have died because of COVID. I think every child should be safe. And I agree that the mother should be vaccinated.
Leving believes the judge is breaking new ground that could play out in other custody cases as well. No word on when the appellate court will make its decision.
But it's okay because she could have FaceTime with her son, I guess. That's still okay for now. Here's a sort of a COVID-related thing. LA County could settle suit against church over mandates. This regards Grace Community Church, and they're on the verge of a settlement. This is in the LA Times either yesterday or this morning. I think it was yesterday. And this is Grace Community Church. John MacArthur is the pastor. And I think it's kind of good news that the County of Los Angeles, which tried to shut them down. If you've ever been to Grace Community, you know that parking you have to park sometimes a couple blocks away because there's no parking right around the church. They have parking lots that are sort of along the river channel that goes through there. And they lease those from the county, and the county tried to cut those off. Okay, you'll have church, we'll take away all your parking. So Grace Community Church, I don't know, I think they arranged to have at local malls or other place parking and bus people in. And they've been meeting all along. And the city and the county and the state will likely end up paying the church $400,000 to reimburse it for their legal fees that they've incurred in the lawsuit. So that's good news. Let's see. So they have an election coming up in California. I don't know. I don't think I have I thought I had a slide for it. Larry Elder is running the recall election for Gavin Newsom. I think it comes up in about 2 weeks. People vote. If over 50% of the people vote to recall Gavin Newsom, then they have a list of candidates, and whoever gets the most votes will win the election and be the new governor of California for another year and 2 months. I heard they found some guy, picked him up for drunk driving or something, and he had 300 mail-in ballots in his car. I'm sure that was just an accident. He probably found them in the restroom at the bar or something and was taking them home to the authorities to dispose of them properly. So Larry Elder is leading right now. It looks like it's really close, 50-50 that Newsom will be recalled. And so Larry Elder is running. He's a conservative radio talk show host. Used to practice law up in Cleveland. I met him 30-some years ago. Wonderful guy, just a very wonderful guy. I'm sure there's political positions he has that I don't agree with, but they are coming after him with guns blazing. The LA Times had an article last Sunday in its paper that said, Larry Elder is the black face of white supremacy. the world has gone stark raving mad. So because the world is so bad, even people like Facebook, I've mentioned this, Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook want to create a thing called the Metaverse, sort of a virtual reality thing that supplements their social media platform. And this secular person in the Financial Times in the UK writes, what metaverse will we choose to live in? And his conclusion is this is not a good thing. This is a secular people, and the Financial Times is one of the newspapers of the party of Davos, just like The Economist is also a magazine, economic magazine of the party of Davos. And so they are no friends of non-globalist agenda, but even every now and then their writers say, something's going on. This does not seem quite right. This might come up later, but I'll talk about it now. There has been how long have we been going? A year and a half? Is that how long we've been going through this 2 weeks to flatten the curve thing? So they put in this rent eviction moratorium. There was no moratorium for landlords on paying their mortgages, but there was a moratorium on renters paying their rent, the very up front. And in a decision back in June, Justice Kavanaugh said, I'm not so sure this is, they let a lower court ruling stand back in June on a prior iteration of the rule. And then it expired, as it was getting ready to expire. The CDC did it again, so it's now been challenged in court. The trial court issued a nationwide injunction against the government enforcing this, saying the government has no authority at all to enforce this kind of rule. So it was appealed to the Circuit Court of Appeals, and the judge said, I'm not going to stay my injunction while you appeal this. It goes into effect right away. So I went to the Court of Appeals. They asked for a stay there. It was denied. They appealed to the Supreme Court I think it was a 6-3 decision. You can know that Breyer, Kagan, and who's the other liberal justice, Sotomayor, voted against it, but the Supreme Court said, we're not issuing a stay. That rule is bad news. They issued even a short opinion. It's kind of unusual that they would do that, but I think they understand the economic cost that goes along with this. So now everybody's like, oh, what's going to happen to the renters that haven't been paying their rent? And the government, they said, well, look, if you're going to help them out, you better get on the stick, because it appears that there's billions and billions of dollars in a fund, but the government hasn't figured out how to distribute it. They can enact all kinds of rules about everything else, but when they actually have money, they can't figure out how to distribute it. It just seems like everything is all messed up. I'm going to jump to the Middle East for a second, just because this will come up when we're talking about Afghanistan, which I think is pretty significant, obviously, since it's dominated everything. So here is a picture of Erdogan speaking at a big celebration this year of a battle of Malazgirt. It was a battle that took place on August 26th, 971. So 1071, 950 years ago. So the Turks have history, and it was a big battle that really was sort of related to the fall of the Byzantine Empire and the rise of Islam that has dominated that area now for quite a bit of time. This is an article from the Arab Times talking about Jordan hopes to end the Syria crisis. I want you to pay attention to all of the little things that are going on in the Middle East, as there are alliances forming, agreements being signed, and people trying to achieve elements of peace and agreement. And it's hard to keep it straight right now, but understand that Jordan is now trying to intervene to get the Syrian crisis over with. And part of that is its own self-interest. They have a couple million Syrian refugees living in Jordan. Jordan can't afford that. They barely have enough water for the people that they have. And they also have a lot of Palestinian refugees from the 1948 war, 48-49 war between Israel and the Arabs that still live in refugee camps to this day in Jordan. So Arab refugees are in an Arab country and they are still treated like refugees. And they can't vote. Now they can marry the king. The King Abdullah's wife is a Palestinian. So he has kind of a heart of Palestinians. But you're seeing all these different alliances: Russia, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Russia, China, Iran, Pakistan. So I have some quotes from some people that I think are good thinkers on the issue. But here's a meeting this week. King Abdullah went to Russia. And he said, listen, we're grateful for Russia supporting stability in Syria, and that Russia recognizes we need to relaunch negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and we need to reach a political solution to the Syrian crisis. In fact, here's a statement. King Abdullah was schooled. His father sent him to school. King Hussein sent him to school in England, in the UK. Military academy, I think, private school, obviously. So he speaks very good English. But here's what he had to say when he was with Vladimir Putin.
As you always know, sir, we look tremendously to the role that you and Russia plays in our region as an element of stability with the challenges that we have. Our bilateral relations continue to improve, but I think more important, as you alluded to, sir, is the challenges that we have in Syria, which you play, I think, the most stable role in being able to move that process forward. And again, your historic role on the Middle East peace process, having met the new Israeli government, I believe that we can be back to talking about how to improve the lives for the Palestinians, but again, the chance of maybe getting the Israelis and Palestinians to at least start talking to each other. We're all watching the unfolding developments in Afghanistan with great concern. But, sir, I think we have always fought against extremism, and unfortunately over the past year of the pandemic, plus what is happening in Afghanistan, I think we have to re-coordinate our role in being able to take the fight back to extremism, not just in our part of the world, but further afield also.
And Putin then said that relations between Russia and Jordan are developing in all fields. Direct communication strengthens our cohesion and brings us closer to each other. So Putin's fully on board with this. There was a big meeting, and Russia had a big army display of the defense things that they have. So that was part of the reason why Abdullah was there, to look over the goods. So now this is just going to go back and forth. There was a giant problem in Afghanistan this week. We started talking about this last Sunday. This came out yesterday. Another attack in Afghanistan was highly likely. Some of the Twitter people that I follow, like Michael_Yon, Y-O-N, and other security people that are well acquainted with what goes on in Afghanistan and what the different factions are and who is who, they came out and they said, look, this is a big problem. I will get to this in a little bit, that Biden welcomed Naftali Bennett, I call him the baby prime minister, the guy who pretends he's the prime minister but doesn't really have any power because he didn't have anybody really. I think he controls 5% of the seats in the Knesset, which is like, so 5% that's enough to get you elected. Well, it's enough to get you elected if you sell out to the other side. Biden during this time said that, well, we have other options if diplomacy fails, and we are going to And Iran got really upset. This came from, I think, the Tehran Times. It was indicative of Biden's relationship with Netanyahu that his first call to Israel was made more than a month after his inauguration, a delay that many saw as a calculated snub to the leader who had been Trump's closest international ally. By contrast, he called Bennett 2 hours after he became prime minister in June, suggesting a warming intelligence relationship. William Burns, the CIA director, visited Israel this month to meet his counterparts and senior Israeli ministers. And that came, I think that came from the New York Times or Washington Post. This is another thing that came up yesterday. Sirhan, the assassin of Bobby Kennedy, was granted parole by the parole board. It's still subject to review by the governor. The Kennedy family is by and large, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and some of his, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend and some of his other siblings have written a very nasty letter to the parole board saying, do not let this man out. Now, he's Palestinian, so what do you think is going to happen in this whole mix if Sirhan is released from prison on parole? It's the timing of this that, again, is sort of stunning to me. While all this is going on, this I think is significant. Leaders of 9 regional countries meet in Baghdad to pursue peace. Macron, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Iraq, Turkey. It's just interesting, the number 9. We know that the number 10 is significant. This is 9. And so let me just make sort of a big global comment here. Now, if you ask me, where is Afghanistan mentioned in Bible prophecy? I wouldn't be able to give you that. But a lot of the countries aren't mentioned in Bible prophecy. We know their regions are, or their ancient names are. So don't say that, well, because it's not mentioned, that it has absolutely no significance. This beast empire that's coming it tramples down the whole world. So I would think that it's not necessarily just centered in right around Israel, although Israel's very important. It is the big Eurasian landmass and all the different things that are going on. And I think you'll see some comments at the end that you might not be aware of. Here's back to Naftali Bennett meeting with Joe Biden. Here's a little clip of Naftali Bennett speaking and Joe, well, just watch what happens.
And one last word, Mr. President. I'll take this off for this part, if I may. You're a man of faith, as am I. In the synagogues across the world, we read a biblical portion beyond the Parsha. It's called the Haftarah. And tomorrow we're going to be reading words of the prophet Isaiah, Yeshayahu. In Hebrew, the words are, Se'i saviv enayich urei, kulam nikbetzu uva'u lach. Banayich merachok yavou, uvnotayich al tzad te'amanna. What this means, I can say anything now, right? What this means is the sons and daughters of the Jewish people are going to come back to our land, are going to nurse our ancient land and rebuild it. And this ancient Jewish prophecy is today's Israel reality. And it's a miracle that you've been so central and so part of it for so many years. So, Mr. President, today you and I, and you've been so generous with your time in these difficult days, you and I are going to write yet another chapter in the beautiful story of the friendship between our two nations, the United States of America and the Jewish and democratic state of Israel. Both of us who seek to do good and need to be strong. Both of us who are a lighthouse in a very, very stormy world. Thank you, Mr. President. I look forward to working with you now and for many years forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and you give me credit, much of which should go to Barack Obama for making sure that we can.
Okay. Yeah. So was he asleep or not? I mean, he moved his hands a little bit. He spoke when Naftali was. So it's a big controversy on social media right now. Did he fall asleep or didn't he? Ayatollah Khomeini came out and said, we support Pakistan, we support the Afghan nation. And now it's called the Emirate of something. So there was an attack at the airport. You can find the pictures and videos of it. It's pretty gruesome. 13 U.S. service personnel, including 1 or 2 females, I think 12 Marines and a Navy officer were killed in a suicide explosion. It was what they call a complex attack, which meant that the suicide person came in a restricted area, blew himself up, and people started to flee towards a direction where there was then there was later a suicide blast in that area because they were trying to maximize the casualties. I think there were 180 killed in these explosions. People were there hoping that they would get out. The president made some comments. Okay, excuse me 1 second. I want to move this towards a latter part of my talk here. So now I got to find where my okay, I think that'll work good there. So the news was just filled with Afghanistan. I say Pakistan because you'll find out from some of the commentators that I'm going to play extended clips from today, wise people that understand what's going on, that Pakistan is really a big deal in this whole thing. It was 50 years ago, like this month, that a U.S. Secretary of State or National Security guy, I don't know what he was at the time, Henry Kissinger was visiting Pakistan secretly and China secretly. I think what you're seeing today is an outflow of some of that globalist agenda that Henry Kissinger was putting in place 50 years ago this month. And I believe that whoever's running Biden, I don't think Biden, well, I don't know. Biden certainly would do it if he could. But it's very complicated. So people were trying to get out of Afghanistan. There was a massive outflow of people from Afghanistan this week. People trying to get out of Kabul. The Taliban has overrun the country. The attack that took place was supposedly done by ISIS-K. And so everybody goes, oh, well, it's ISIS-K, it's not the Taliban. Listen, you can put all these things in a blender and dump it out, because what you'll find is that people who were Taliban 2 months ago are ISIS-K today. Or they were Taliban last week and now they're ISIS-K. Or they were ISIS-K, now they're Taliban. It doesn't make any difference. This is a global jihadi movement. They just have different factions, and people move in and out of this. But the one thing that's coming out of this is this massive outflow of refugees. These are the numbers. I mean, I saw pictures of planes landing at Dulles and people getting off. It was overwhelming, the facilities at Dulles. There are air bases all over the country that are trying to figure out what people are going to do, how they're going to handle it. And look at the numbers here for the United States. There are 105,000 that we know of so far. There's going to be chain migration. There's going to be a lot of people come with them. And do you really think in the chaos at the airport or the chaos in the country that everybody that comes has been properly vetted? That's just not possible. And most of them are military-age males. So what does that mean? I've seen that you could expect 10 to 20 times the number that have come so far to ultimately end up here. And look what 1 million refugees a number of years ago, back in 2015, did to Europe. Europe's still reeling from that. We're going to maybe take in 1 or 2 million Afghan refugees, let alone all the other people on the border that are coming from all over the world. They're not just coming from Central America or Mexico. This is a global assault on the United States. And the question needs to be asked, why are people in charge allowing this? What are they trying to accomplish? So here is Anthony Blinken and some comments he made. He's Secretary of State, and you can judge for yourself what you think of his answers.
Confidence today that the Taliban will actually abide by some of these requirements and expectations that the international community has put on it?
I'm not going to put a percentage on it. I can just tell you again that the Taliban has made their own commitments. They've made them publicly. They've made them privately. And again, I think they have a very strong self-interest in acting with a modicum of responsibility going forward. But they will make their own determinations.
Andrew. Mr. Secretary, thank you. But the Taliban right now, focusing on the mission right now, are not living up to their commitments. People are being stopped trying to get into the airport. I'm talking about, women, SIVs, others, Afghans, people with papers, and they're being stopped outside the airport now. There are total bottlenecks, which seem to rise to the level of what the president said were the contingencies if the Taliban is not complying, if the flow can't continue. We're loading planes, but some planes are leaving without, and some people are people who have private planes waiting for them with landing rights, but can't get into the airport, as well as beyond the SIVs, there are lawyers, there are judges, women lawyers, judges, educators. We've told them for 20 years, you can live up to your potential. And now they feel abandoned. And I'd finally like to ask you about the local hires. We evacuated our embassy, and there have been cables back that I know you must be familiar with, or your teams are, of people who feel completely betrayed. And these are thousands of people that we rely on in embassies around the world. The message is going forward that we will not be loyal. They were not told about the evacuation. They were not put on those choppers with our American staff. And they were forced, many of them, to find their own way through the Taliban checkpoints and then get turned away at the airport. And some even got turned away once they were inside. So, what is the message to people working for the U.S. government? Veterans groups are angry about the SIVs, and then there are all the millions of Afghan women who have told their daughters and been raised under this promise of a future which the Taliban are already, according to Ambassador Verveer today, are denying. There are horrifying examples from provinces and from inside Kabul of people being targeted door to door, people in safe houses being sought out. And all this promise of you will be safe, the Taliban spokesman said, stay in your homes because we haven't told all of our people how to treat women, how to respect women. They also say you can go to school, you can work as long as you comply with Sharia law, which under their interpretation is the most extreme example of the Islamic code that is seen anywhere in the world.
Andrew, a few things. First, of the 82,000 plus people who so far have been evacuated, about 46% have been women and children. And we've been intensely focused, particularly on making sure that we can get women at risk out of
Does he look comfortable to you?
Second, with regard to women and other Afghans at risk going forward, I will use every diplomatic, economic, political, and assistance tool at my disposal, working closely with allies and partners who feel very much the same way, to do everything possible to uphold their basic rights. And that's going to be a relentless focus of our actions going forward. Locally employed staff, along with American citizens, nothing is more important to me as Secretary of State than to do right by the people who have been working side by side with American diplomats in our embassy. And I can tell you, Andrea, that we are relentlessly focused on getting the locally employed staff out of Afghanistan and out of harm's way. And let me leave it at that for now.
Your spokesperson indicated in recent days that de facto the Taliban are in charge in Kabul, but there is no legal recognized government by the United States at this moment. And it kind of begs the question, why does the United States even have to pay attention to what the Taliban wants? It's an SDGT. It's sanctioned by many organizations. It's already losing access to Afghan government resources because of its past and current behavior. Why should the United States even care what the Taliban wants to be done at the airport or frankly anywhere else in the country, since they are not, in the U.S.'s eyes, a legally recognized government?
Our focus right now is on getting our citizens and getting our partners, Afghan partners, third country partners who've been working.
Okay, so that's enough. That's the equivalent of waterboard. But this is our Secretary of State. And my understanding is the military left today. And there's still a lot of people. There were a lot of people gotten out over the last few days. But there are people that I would term stranded. By the way, Jen Psaki in one of her press briefings this week said, "We hope that the Taliban knows that the world is watching them and they'll behave." That I'm paraphrasing. What? It almost seems like, we'll talk about that. But here she is asking some questions about, are people stranded?
But does the president have a sense that most of the criticism is not of leaving Afghanistan, it's the way that he has ordered it to happen by pulling the troops before getting these Americans who are now stranded? Does he have a sense of that?
First of all, I think it's irresponsible to say Americans are stranded. They are not. We are committed to bringing Americans who want to come home. We are in touch with them via phone, via text, via email, via any way that we can possibly reach Americans to get them home if they want to return home.
There are no Americans stranded is the White House's official position on what's happening in Afghanistan right now.
I'm just calling you out for saying that we are stranding Americans in Afghanistan when we have been very clear that we are not leaving Americans who want to return home. We are going to bring them home. And I think that's important for the American public to hear and understand.
Okay, and then following up on what somebody asked, Jake, the president likes to say America is back, but his policies have Americans getting beat up by the Taliban and Afghans handing babies over barbed wire fences. Is that what he meant when he said America is back?
What the president meant is that we are going to continue to lead in the world, including being the leaders in evacuating not just our Afghan partners, not just American citizens, but now also our allies. And we have done that by evacuating approximately 42,000 people over the last month. That is Americans leading. That is our men and women in our military leading on the ground, securing the airport after the Afghans fled and didn't secure the airport, and ensuring that we are taking care of our partners as we promised to.
And this was the upvote, downvote, and the YouTube of this particular iteration. This happens every time these people speak. Go look at the videos of President Biden. So here we go. There were biggest airlift in many, many years. And the question was, there are a lot of Christians and missionaries in Afghanistan that have been over there. What about them? Did you hear one person from the Secretary of State or the White House or the majority party in Congress, in the House of Representatives or the Senate, mention the word Christians anywhere in their comments. Did you hear that? If you did, please send it to me. By those people. There were a lot of organizations that stood up. The Nazarene Fund, which is a charity of Glenn Beck, did get planes. Now listen, I don't want to get into the theology of Glenn Beck or the theology of the people who he borrowed the plane from or who loaned them the plane. They were trying to rescue Christians, okay? That's a good thing. He was interviewed on Tucker Carlson, Glenn Beck was. I want you to listen very carefully to what he says here. This is disturbing.
So Americans are very decent people to their great and enduring credit. And as they watch what's happening on television, their hearts have swelled with sympathy. Again, that's not sarcastic, it's real. You live in a country where people really care about people they've never met before. And that's why this is a great country, because it's filled with great and compassionate people, even if they reach different conclusions from what you would reach. So in the last week, a small number of Americans have headed to Afghanistan and the region to help evacuate people who are trapped there, because the Biden administration just isn't doing that very effectively. Glenn Beck is one of those Americans trying to help. His charity, the Nazarene Fund, has already helped rescue thousands of Afghan Christians from the country. Glenn Beck joins us now from a location in the region. We'll leave it there. Glenn Beck, thanks so much for coming on. So you just headed over there at the drop of a hat. You were texting me on the way. I was kind of amazed. Tell us what you've seen since you've been there. What have you learned? What's it like?
I'm not in Afghanistan. I'm in one of the countries in the region that are actually taking these people as refugees, as a weighing station, just to get them off of the tarmac. They do not want to be identified because they are concerned about the new coming terror that is going to be happening in the region. I will tell you that we have pulled out 5,100 people, Christians, women, children, and put them on planes. What you're seeing there is one of the last planes that took off before the bombing or bombings today. We had about 500 refugees, women and children mainly, and we had them inside of the airport today. And one military official ordered them to go back on the other side of the gate. I have pictures of them this morning pleading to get back through the gate. And then I have pictures of blood and body parts and nothing but death in that same area. We believe that our State Department is directly responsible for what we believe were some of these people. I don't know how many survived.
Have you been able to get a sizable number of Christians out of Afghanistan? It seems like that's a group that would need to leave.
5,100. The country that I'm in right now is at their limit. There are only 3 countries. The State Department has blocked us every step of the way. The State Department and the White House have been the biggest problem. Everyone else has been working together, putting aside differences and trying to get these people to safety. The State Department and the White House have blocked us every single step of the way. In fact, an ambassador was called in Macedonia last night and told not to accept any of these people as we were trying to get them off of the tarmac here to keep the airport flowing and getting these Christians out. We haven't really been able to move anybody for about 12 hours. Our mission is now changing greatly. We have to send people into even greater danger to try to smuggle these Christians out who are marked not just for death, but to be set on fire alive because they're converted Christians. Also, tomorrow, I'm getting back onto another plane, so not funded by the Nazarene Fund. Nothing I am doing here. I'm paying for this here. Copeland Ministries has let me borrow their jet, but we're going someplace else to open up 2 countries, and I don't even want to say who they are, because I'm afraid our State Department will call them and threaten them. But we are going to move these people to new homes, and they are going to be a blessing to some country. I don't know why we have open borders. I mean, it's really interesting. We have open borders and closed airports. One group of people are exploited, raped, and killed by drug cartels. And then the other group of people are raped, exploited, and crucified or set on fire by terrorists. There seems to be a pattern with the Biden administration.
Yeah. So Islamic countries, Muslim countries are more eager to accept Christians from Afghanistan than our State Department, which really it tells you a lot.
This country that I'm in, I begged them last night to let me tell the world who they are. They have more compassion for these Christians than our American government, and it is insulting, embarrassing, and wrong.
Yeah.
What our government is doing now, I believe, is out and out evil.
So listen, the first hour I talked about a little bit about demons. This is demonic. Over time, people have talked about the Muslim Brotherhood lackeys that have infiltrated our government, and everybody goes, "Oh, John, come on, that doesn't happen." Phil Haney, that doesn't happen. That's what Phil Haney used to say until somebody killed him. No investigation. The last person to talk to him has never been talked to by the FBI. We have a crime syndicate running our country. Some of the same people in the White House were in charge of that Benghazi thing. Do you remember that? And people died, including a U.S. ambassador. They don't care. They need to be removed from office, then indicted. It is angering. U.S. veterans have called this a digital Dunkirk. If you're a student of World War II, you will know what that means. Special ops people, former Rangers and Green Berets and Navy SEALs have mounted rescue operations into Afghanistan and rescued people. Praise God for their courage. I saw an interview with Tucker of one of the Marines who was killed. You look it up online. It's just the blood of every single person is on the head of Joe Biden, Jen Psaki, Anthony Blinken, the military leadership, and Susan Rice, and whoever is pulling her strings. I mentioned this earlier. This is an editorial in this morning's New York Times. A more secular United States. This is what you get. This is what you get. Afghan blame game erupts. This is a summary of the U.S. equipment left behind. And the comment is, well, they're not that, they don't know how to read, they can't maintain the equipment. Oh, you're going to hear in a minute where the equipment's going. In the region, to another country. That you have never heard a negative comment from the Biden administration, Obama 1, Obama 2, or Obama 3, say a word about it. Here's the Taliban putting on military uniforms of the U.S. Here is a Marine commander, unit commander, who he had it. Here's what he said.
But the reason people are so upset on social media right now is not because the Marine on the battlefield let someone down. That service member has always rose to the occasion and done extraordinary things. People are upset because their senior leaders let them down, and none of them are raising their hands and accepting accountability or saying, we messed this up. If an 05 battalion commander has the simplest live fire incident EO complaint, boom, fired. But we have a Secretary of Defense that testified to Congress in May that the Afghan National Security Force could withstand the Taliban advance. We have chairmen of Joint Chief, who the Commandant is a member of that, who's supposed to advise on military policy. We have a Marine combatant commander. All of these people are supposed to advise, and I'm not saying we've got to be in Afghanistan forever, but I am saying, did any of you throw your rank on the table and say, hey, it's a bad idea to evacuate Bagram Airfield, the strategic air base, before we evacuate everyone? Did anyone do that? And when you didn't think to do that, did anyone raise their hand and say, we completely messed this up? I've got battalion commander friends right now that are posting similar things, and they're saying, wondering if all the lives were lost and if it was in vain, all those people that we've lost over the last 20 years. And he goes on to say that we're all part of a chain. While every link may not be tested, the strength of the chain is only as strong as each link, and you got to be, good links, something like that. And what I'll say is, and from my position, potentially all those people did die in vain if we don't have senior leaders that own up and raise their hand and say, we did not do this well in the end. Without that, we just keep repeating the same mistakes. This amalgamation of the economic / corporate / political / higher military ranks are not holding up their end of the bargain. I want to say this very strongly. I have been fighting for 17 years. I am willing to throw it all away to say to my senior leaders, I demand accountability.
So you know what happened to him? The military responded. They fired him on the spot. The only one who's shown courage and clear thinking. Austin, Milley, what a joke. I'm not even going to play you the clips of these people. They can go out there and they can get all their critical race theory implementation and all this other stuff, and men die. Christians may be slaughtered. Americans stranded, Jen Zuckerberger, stranded. Look it up in the dictionary. May be slaughtered too. Or at least we'll have hostages that are many times more than what happened in Iran. Caroline Glick talked a little bit about what are the implications for this. A few-minute clip worth listening to. Here we go. She has a friend named Gotti. I can't remember his last name. He used to be a left-wing journalist. He's seen the light. So here's Caroline talking about the situation.
Citizens, civilians that are trapped in Afghanistan, and the Afghans who are working for the Americans almost immediately if they're really going to abide by the deadline or the Taliban's ultimatum. And, this is not true. They don't have to do this. The Americans are infinitely more powerful than the Taliban. And if they wanted to, U.S. SEAL was on Fox saying, if he were Biden, he would say, we're going to take over every single airfield in Afghanistan now to evacuate our people. And if you so much as look at us wrong, we're going to kill you. We didn't come here to negotiate with terrorists, which is exactly what William Burns, the director of the CIA, did today. We're not negotiating with terrorists. That's why we came to Afghanistan, because we killed terrorists. That was the whole point of the war on terror, was that we weren't going to bow before the Taliban. But here is Biden, the same guy who took a knee to Black Lives Matter and to Antifa, is now taking a knee to the Taliban. He is literally begging them to let him evacuate Americans. He's not allowing U.S. forces to do their job. One of the worst things that I heard today is that the department, the U.S. government department in charge of the evacuation isn't the Department of Defense, it's the Department of State. And because it's the Department of State, it means that the decision was already made and it's already been accepted by everybody. Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, Tony Blinken, the secretary of state, Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor. These people have all agreed that the Americans are not going to fight for their citizens. They're going to leave thousands of Americans behind enemy lines. They're trapped. They're trapped. Politico published today or yesterday a story which is so alarming. Like, once you hear it, you can't get it out of your head. The Americans left behind, not only in their own installations, but in the Afghan government buildings that now the Taliban controls. All of the biometric data of all of the Afghans that were working with them, all of it, their fingerprints, their eyes, everything, their retina scans, everything. They have everything, all of the personal information, and of course the cell phone records of all of the Afghans who have been working with the Americans. They don't need a roadmap. They have an azimuth to every single Afghan who was working with the Americans. They all have a scarlet letter on their forehead. They're all sitting ducks. They can just be picked up any time. If they don't get out before the Americans leave, they're stuck. They're dead men walking. They'll be tortured. They'll be murdered. Their families will be murdered. Their families will be tortured. Their children will be raped. All of these terrible things is what is going to happen to them. And let's not even talk about the plight of the women and girls in Afghanistan, or even the boys in Afghanistan, where pederasty is the big.
Khashoggi, this is what we're distressed about in terms of human rights.
Well, the Saudis. I mean, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but the Saudis just signed a defense pact with Russia. They're done with the Americans. They figured it out. I don't even know if they needed this in order to figure it out, but certainly immediately after this happened, they set to work finalizing a defense pact with the Russians. The UAE are fast on their heels. Iran, one of the untold heroes of the Taliban war effort, that they were supplying them with logistical support, that was supplying them with weapons, that was supplying them with fuel, all along. They were their logistical base. And they're allied with the Taliban, something we were never allowed to acknowledge, right? Because, they're Shiites and the Taliban are Sunnis, so they can't possibly be working together. The fact that all of al-Qaeda's leadership, their Shura Council, decamped after the Tora Bora battle in 2001 to Iran, and their headquarters were moved to Tehran after the fall of the Taliban at the end of 2001, nobody ever talked about that. The Iranians enabled the entire al-Qaeda war against U.S. forces as well. From Afghanistan, they moved to Iran, and they directed the war in Iraq. So this is all Iran, and Iran is obviously a major beneficiary of the American rout and humiliation. The Chinese and the Russians immediately greeted what happened by doing what? By allowing Iran to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is now a growing in power economic forum that the Chinese founded about a decade ago. And the Iranians have been asking to become members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization for the past decade or so. And the first thing that they did after the American rout was give them membership.
Well, that's troubling. So here, just to summarize, the Shanghai Cooperation Council, the Belt and Road thing, China's all over this. Russia's all over this. The world changed this week. This whole Eurasian thing, which is a pretty big deal, I think in Bible prophecy, if you want to know what Eurasia looks like, that's what Eurasia looks like. Look what's right in the middle of all that. There on the Eastern Mediterranean. You understand? And so the Central Asia landmass, this is a big deal, and I do think it plays into Bible prophecy. And the Biden administration, well, we didn't know that they were going to do this. We didn't know that they were going to do this. Oh, well, how about this report issued by the Department of National Homeland Security, Director of National Intelligence, DNI, back in April. Look at this. It talks about, it's a worldwide assessment. Conflicts and instability. Afghanistan, we assess the prospects for a peace deal will remain low during the next year. So April, May, it's still within that year. The Taliban is likely to make gains on the battlefield, and the Afghan government will struggle to hold the Taliban at bay if the coalition withdraws support. What did they do? They withdrew air support. They withdrew all support. We closed our major airfield that was the most defensible, maybe the most defensible one on the planet. Put them in an airport, what amounts to a regional airport in the middle of a city of 4 million people that's got mountains on 3 sides. That's a highly secure facility. Look at this. In the Western Hemisphere, the combined effects of the pandemic and hurricanes, we have a hurricane, we have maybe It may hit Cat 5 by the time it hits Louisiana today. Hurricane Ida. In the Western Hemisphere, the combined effects of the pandemic and hurricanes, as well as perceived changes in U.S. immigration policy and seasonal employment opportunities in the United States, are creating the economic and physical conditions for a resurgence in U.S.-bound migration, especially if COVID-19 infection rates in the United States decline. Well, they're not declining, but it's not stopping the immigration, is it? Not one whit. This is an editorial in this morning's New York Times, Repression Without Borders. It talks about a report that comes from, here's the report. Out of Sight, Not Out of Reach, Freedom House, talking about repressive governments using things on the internet. And essentially the thing is, look at all the tentacles that reach from all these states to all these different places. Look where they're all going. You see where the epicenter of all that is? All those little white lines? Look where they're heading. Looks like Turkey, Iran. It's just, here's another graphic that shows the tactics of transnational repression. It talks about how China is one of the major implementers of this. Here's Laura Logan tweeted this. Find Laura Logan. South African, but she lives in America now. Pam and I were listening to her this morning. I'm going to play you an extended clip of hers. She had interviewed with Tucker Carlson and other people. She is very wise. She spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. She knows the names and the places and the people. Most Americans don't understand what's happening in Kabul. Been on this all night, again, with no end. I heard her interviewed. She could hardly talk. U.S. citizens are fighting through enemy lines to get to the airport. When they show their blue passport to 82nd Airborne soldiers at the gate, many are turned away and sent back to the Taliban. Americans, our government, our military, our State Department, and the White House. Not my White House. I didn't vote for that guy. All that stands between these Americans and safety, home, is the U.S. government and military. Absolutely correct. Not to make light of it, this is the Turkish Erdogan mouthpiece, epic fail. A lot of memes flying around. Just wait until I finish, you'll be an icon. Biden speaking to Jimmy Carter. And then here's a thing, U.S. presidents, what they look like at the beginning and end of their term. Okay. Terror organizations like Hezbollah, what you'll see is through all these countries in the Middle East, there's an embedded command, control, and social structure that Iran is doing in Syria. They're doing it in Lebanon. The Taliban is doing it. The Taliban had a complete structure set up, so even though they weren't in power, there were people, they were controlling things. They had a spy network set up. They know where everything is. This is the other thing Caroline talked about, the pact between Saudi Arabia and Russia on the defense pact. This is the American Mind, an article. The Biden administration's domestic terrorism strategy is an announcement that they're coming for you. That came from the American Mind. A few buffoonish and overzealous protesters. I don't have time to go into it. This is all part of somebody's running this show, folks. And we'll uncover this. I'm pretty sure I know who. Benghazi was the disaster. If Benghazi was the disaster, Kabul and Afghanistan is an epic failure. And there's one common thread. There's one person who was in both a number of people who were in both White Houses. You know who that is. And I think she has someone that she answers to. Here's Laura Logan on Tucker Carlson's extended interview the other night. 2 clips. This is one of the bravest, wisest women I've ever been aware of in my life. Listen to this.
Well, essentially what you're looking at is the collapse of the U.S. will to continue in Afghanistan. I think what people really miss in the whole conversation is that the United States has the power to effect anything. And the Afghans know that. So what's really interesting about living on the ground with people in a country like Afghanistan is that you get to see, when you take away the prism of, political spin and parties and, all the trappings that we have that obscure the truth from us in the U.S., these people, they teach you how to look at things in their most basic form.
Yes,
right?
that is so true.
That's what they do,
Yes.
and that's how they look at it. So they know, for example, the United States could bomb the Taliban supply lines right now. They're all coming from Pakistan. Everybody knows it. In fact, they're coming right through the spin bolt.
By the way, so everything goes wrong in Kabul and Afghanistan, and the administration going, well, we didn't know this. It took us by surprise. We're trying to do the best we can. And then a suicide bombing happens, and what happens? In like 24 hours, they bombed the exact suicide bomber cell. This is just, okay, let me go back here to Laura, and I'll have to advance it.
Well, essentially what you're looking at is lines right now. They're all coming from Pakistan. Everybody knows it. In fact, they're coming right through the Spin Boldak border crossing, one of the early ones that the Taliban took in the beginning of this offensive. They know that the Taliban doesn't exist without Pakistan, right? And the Pakistani ISI. They know that the United States
ISI being the Pakistani Intelligence Service.
Right. And they know the United States funds the entire defense budget of the Pakistani military and intelligence services. So, for example, you could stop the money. You could stop the remittances of Pakistanis living in the United States. You could put sanctions. You could have visas. Every time you try to address this issue, the immediate response for 20 years of this war has been, you're advocating for war in Pakistan. No, you're not. What they know is there are many things the United States could do right now to change what has happened and is happening in Afghanistan, and they're not doing it.
Wait, can I just pause? I'm asking you a series of dumb questions. Why would the U.S. government be funding the Pakistani military and its intelligence services?
Okay, so that's a fantastic question, and really is one for the U.S. government. But what I can tell you is that when we hear about the bureaucracy that is on Capitol Hill, which are the bureaucrats who survive from administration to administration. This has been their policy. They have pushed through the Bush administration, through Clinton, through Obama, through Trump, and now to Biden, that because Pakistan is a nuclear nation, they are the only country in that region that actually matters. In fact, Joe Biden told Afghan's president, when it was Hamid Karzai was still in power, exactly that. On his listening tour after Obama won, he said to him, we don't care about Afghanistan. And we believe that Pakistan is the most important country in that region, and they always will be. And that was that message never, ever changed. And what you're seeing in Afghanistan today is the results of that policy, because the Taliban leadership is based in Pakistan. I mean,
Yes.
the Quetta Shura, the Peshawar Shura, and the Miram Shah Shura. Those are the 3 leadership councils that cover the entire war for the Taliban in Afghanistan. They are not just in Pakistan, they are in the loving and warm embrace of the ISI, who recruits on their behalf, when, who orders Pakistanis in the tribal areas to give up their children to go and fight. They don't have a choice sometimes. And the United States has known this from day one. I mean, this is the staggering part to me, is that when you hear this debate, the intelligence agencies failed to see this. Seriously? Seriously. The NSA is known as the crown jewel of intelligence collection in the world. There isn't a digital signature in existence that they don't collect and store and analyze and have algorithms and everything else to sort through. The idea that they miss this, you know what it takes to do an invasion like this? You have to stage forces. You have to plan. You have to have meetings. You have to have, weapons that are moving in.
I'm looking at our producers. Are you listening to this?
I mean, you have to have a deal.
You're making. Keep going.
I mean, it's so ridiculous. It's as ridiculous as believing that Ahmed Chalabi, some Iranian refugee in the U.S., persuaded the U.S. government to go to war. I mean, that's literally our narrative on the Iraq war.
Yes.
Seriously? I mean, we get so caught up in the weeds of this. What they want you to believe is that Afghanistan is complicated. Because if you complicate it, it's a tactic in information warfare called ambiguity increasing. So now we're all talking about the corruption and the this and the that, and there's all these complex parts. But at its heart, every single thing in the world, in your personal life, professionally, on the global stage, at its heart, it's very simple. It always comes down to one thing. One or two things. And in this case, in Afghanistan, this comes down to the fact that the United States wants this outcome. Whoever's in power right now, whoever's really pulling the strings, and I don't know that, they could do anything they want to change this, and they're not. And you see that on the southern border. You see that with critical race theory. You see that with the violations of big tech. You see it with, I mean, in 1,000 different ways, you see it all around you. And what you know from that...
You're telling the truth right now. I can just feel, I mean, you know, sometimes when you're listening to someone unveil an insight and you haven't tested it against anything, but you just know it's right, what you're saying is right.
It's very simple. You know, you can have a marriage and, you know, be thinking, should I stay with my wife, should I leave her? It can be very complicated. But in the end, it'll come down to one critical, defining, major thing. And everything else flows from that. And that's exactly where we're at in Afghanistan. The United States government could change this even today, and they don't do it. They don't use the leverage they have with Pakistan. They'll give you 5,000 reasons, but it doesn't matter. They don't tell you the national security threat posed by letting the cartels come across the southern border, do they? They only have a conversation about one thing, the humanitarian aspect. They never address that. Well, they're not addressing right now. You know what they're not addressing? All of the Al-Qaeda and other Islamic terrorist literature and communications that they're picking up that are celebrating this as a massive defeat. They're not talking about why the Taliban are dismantling advanced U.S. military equipment and sending it back over the border to Pakistan. And worse, they're not stopping it. Why? We are, the NSA and the National Geospatial Agency, which controls the satellites, and all of these other arms of the United States government are watching this happen in real time. They are seeing advanced U.S. military equipment going over the border into Iran and going into Pakistan, and they're doing nothing to stop it. Why not? So what the Afghans will tell you, what they will tell you is that the United States chose this outcome.
Listen to this. So this is Caroline Glick. When Naftali Bennett went to meet Biden, this is a concluding paragraph in her article in Friday's Israel Hayom, whether Bennett would be better off postponing the trip. I mean, Biden's probably going to sleep through it anyway, right? I mean, who would ever guess that? The trip until the smoke begins to settle remains to be seen. But what is clear enough is that with Iran sprinting towards the nuclear finish line and U.S. credibility in a state of unprecedented collapse, if Israel wants to prevent Iran from acquiring military nuclear capabilities, Biden is not the man to see. That's right. So here's another part of Laura Logan's interview. This is very fascinating. I apologize for keeping you over, but this is great stuff. And pray for this lady. I mean, imagine the threats that she must. I mean, remember, she was assaulted, horribly sexually assaulted in Tahrir Square during the Muslim Brotherhood riots. I'm very impressed with her courage. And here's this is a shorter clip.
What's China's view of this?
They walk hand in hand with Pakistan. They have already recognized the Taliban because they received an official delegation
Already?
of the Taliban. Oh, yeah. This is a couple of weeks ago. There was an official visit of the Chinese government and the Taliban. I believe it was in China. You can see the pictures. I mean, they took official photos standing with Chinese officials. The Russians have already put out a statement. I mean, there's intelligence reports that the Russians have already met with several delegations of the Taliban, but they have put out a public statement that they are ready to recognize the Islamic Emirate. The Iranians have been meeting with the Taliban. And so China has been supplying weapons to the Taliban and to Pakistan. And it's very obvious, you know, China's been fighting the doctrine of unrestricted warfare against the United States. They are very much invested in the strategy to undermine the U.S. from within and on every front.
How's it going?
Extremely well. They're winning.
How's their bioweapons program? Is it effective?
Very. Yes, along with their drug program.
Yeah,
because
I don't know why I'm laughing. This is like the saddest thing. This is one of the saddest conversations I've had in a long time, but it's so interesting.
Imagine how my children feel.
No, I can't even imagine.
Hearing this at home.
Do they?
Yes, of course. Because you can't, I mean, this affects every aspect of our lives. My children were taught at school that Karl Marx is a famous German philosopher in a class about different economic systems.
So, her kids are going to be tough. I'll close with this. But could go on and on. Brian Kennedy, I heard an interview with him on warroom.org, Steve Bannon's daily podcast. I don't agree with everything that they say, but I'm telling you what, they're bringing it. They're bringing you information that you're not getting anywhere else. And they had Brian Kennedy on yesterday, and he has this article at the American Mind. Let me read the first couple paragraphs. You need to go read it. Brian Kennedy, American Mind. Biden embraces defeat. The administration leaves Afghanistan and abandons America. It would be easy to attribute the disaster of leaving Afghanistan, both human and strategic, to the incompetence of President Biden and his administration. After all, human incompetence normally explains a lot, but the affairs of a great nation like ours and its military are not the work of one man. There are generals, well-credentialed foreign policy experts, and senior intelligence officials who have best devised how to leave Afghanistan in order to achieve certain strategic and political objectives. The notion that there was a single incompetent decision made to abandon Afghanistan defies both logic and common sense. It was a matter of high government policy that the United States depart Afghanistan, abandon military equipment, and leave both Americans and our allies and Christians to the tender mercies of radical Islamic Taliban. The exit from Afghanistan then appears designed to accomplish two things. First, to demoralize the American military and the American people. Over 22,000 American service personnel have been killed or injured in Afghanistan. Every American knows someone who served there. Knowing full well that the Afghan military would not defend the country, there could be little doubt that the United States was turning the country over to the Taliban. Moreover, the U.S. did not do so with the appearance of being run out of the country in shame and defeat, or actually did so with the appearance of being run out of the country in shame and defeat. One can only assume this was meant to demonstrate to American servicemen that their sacrifice had been in vain, and to the American people that our cause or defending America from the scourge of radical Islam was not just. And if you had the audacity to speak up, we're going to fire you. No pension for you. You don't do what we say, you don't get government payments. It's a beast system forming. I have no doubt. How else are sensible people to view the footage of killings, chaos, desperation, harassment, and contempt for the U.S. and our citizens in Kabul? Taken together, these images are far more effective tools of propaganda than nearly anything al-Qaeda and ISIS has employed over the past 2 decades. Their message is clear. America is weak and resistance to Islam is futile. That is the lesson the Biden administration has made possible. It is one for which radicals such as Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar have signaled their approval throughout their tenure in Congress. The second purpose of the Afghan debacle was to signal to the world that the United States has no interest in defending a liberal world order, and that from here on out we will not defend either human freedom or our own self-interest, however bizarre that may sound. Even the most serious isolationists would not have left Afghanistan the way we have. A minimum requirement would be to preserve the prestige and credibility of the United States with our allies and to ensure that our enemies would not be emboldened by our fecklessness. What must Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea think of the United States and our commitments to defend them against the communist Chinese and their predations in the region? Get this article, read it. Self-defeat. What now? We are at a moment now like none other in our history. The American political order has been made a mockery of since November 3rd, 2020. Much will be necessary to sort that out, but our credibility on the global stage has now been eradicated, and Americans will reasonably wonder whether our union can endure. Now is the time for men of goodwill to rise to the defense of the American experiment in free government. We should pray it is not too late. Listen, be every soul subject to the higher powers. The higher power in the United States is the Constitution of the United States. That's the governing document, not what some petty tyrants decide it is, okay? That's the way it works. On Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, Frank Gaffney and the Center for Security Policy, I'm sure you can find it at securefreedom.org. There'll be a webinar on China influence in this. I've showed you pictures of the massive port that China has built in Pakistan and the roads that come down through Pakistan from China. This is all somebody's doing this at the behest of people. It's so evil. I know who ultimately is in charge of this. Satan, the devil. And people are doing his bidding. So pray for wisdom, courage, doing godly Christian stuff. We need to be on mission. Let's pray. Father, we pray that you will empower us, embolden us to do what is right, to stand firm in an evil day, hold fast to the faith, as we say almost every week now, and act like men of God, women of God, and that we would be focused in all we do on glorifying you. Guide us in how you would have us do that. Give us opportunities to share the gospel. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.